Be me, Craig, 31 years old, warehouse manager at a mid-sized distribution company. Alarm goes off at 5:30 every single morning, 6 days most weeks. Not complaining, I chose this job and I like having a steady paycheck. Been dating Priya for about 14 months at the point this story starts. She's a sociology student, very into theory, very into activism, very into explaining structural problems to anyone nearby. We're renting a 2-bedroom apartment together. Her half of the rent comes out of my paycheck every month. She calls it me supporting her education. I've got another name for it, but I don't say it out loud. Things between us aren't terrible on the surface. We eat dinner together most nights. We watch stuff on TV. She talks a lot about her coursework, and I listen. She's smart, genuinely. And in the beginning, I liked hearing about the things she was reading. At some point, it shifted from sharing ideas to correcting me pretty constantly. I chalked it up to her being in school mode and figured it would level out eventually. It didn't really level out, but I'd gotten used to it. I'm a practical person. I deal with what's in front of me. What's in front of me at work is broken equipment, scheduling problems, guys calling in sick. What's in front of me at home is Priya, and I'd made my peace with how things ran. Or I thought I had. Then one evening I come home, and there's a notebook sitting in the middle of the kitchen table. Green cover, cheap, the kind you get in a pack of 3 at the dollar store. Priya is at the table waiting, which is unusual, because she usually has headphones on when I get home. She slides the notebook toward me with both hands like she's presenting something significant. Tells me it's a privileged journal. I pick it up and look at it. She explains the concept. Every day, I write one entry, documenting a moment where I benefited from being a man. The goal is to help me understand my position in society. She says this with complete sincerity, zero irony, like she's explaining how a new appliance works. I turn the notebook over in my hands a couple of times. I say, "Seriously?" She says, "Yes, seriously," and lists some things it'll help me with: growth, awareness, understanding. A few more words I only half hear. I'm standing in my work clothes. I haven't eaten since noon. I drove 40 minutes to get home. I look at the notebook. I look at her. I think about having a real conversation about this. I don't have the energy for what that conversation would turn into. I just nod and take the notebook to the bedroom. Set it on the nightstand. Eat some leftover rice from the fridge. Go to sleep. That was the beginning of the whole thing. I had absolutely no idea what I was actually starting when I picked that notebook up. The first few days, I genuinely try to do the exercise the way she intended. I sit down after dinner and think about moments during the day where being a guy gave me some kind of edge. It's harder than it sounds, because I'm not in an academic mindset at work. I'm managing a loading dock. My brain is occupied with shipment windows and whether the evening crew is showing up on time. I write things down anyway. Something about how the team takes my word on decisions without questioning everything. Something about feeling safe walking to my car late at night when we have inventory runs. Something about getting a car loan approved without much trouble a few years back. Priya reads the first few entries and nods approvingly. She says it's a good start, that I'm beginning to see it. I say thanks. The whole ritual feels a little strange, but it's not hurting anything. 5 minutes, a few sentences, she's happy. I figure I can keep doing this indefinitely. I've done more inconvenient things to keep the peace. Then the second week arrives. There is an equipment failure at work, a forklift on the east dock that goes down mid-shift. When a forklift dies, it's not just that one machine. It backs up the entire intake queue. Trucks are waiting. The afternoon timeline is gone. I have to call the maintenance contractor and rewrite the whole schedule and move 2 guys over to manual offload. It's the kind of afternoon that becomes an evening no matter what you do. By the time the dock is clear and I can leave, it's close to 10 at night. I drive home with my lower back doing that thing it does after a long day on my feet and my stomach completely empty. I walk in the door. Priya is awake, and she's not concerned. She's annoyed. Not the, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" kind of annoyed. The kind where she's been building the case against me while I was gone. I try to explain the forklift situation in maybe 3 sentences. She's sort of listening, but also already putting together her response. It becomes a longer conversation about communication patterns and consideration, and a general principle about how I always do this. I want to point out that this specific situation, an equipment breakdown keeping me late, has happened maybe twice in 14 months. But making that point would add another 30 minutes to the conversation, and I have a 5:30 alarm. I sit at the kitchen table and let it run its course. It ends eventually. I eat crackers and cheese from the fridge, the only things I can deal with at that hour. I go to the bedroom and I open the notebook. I start writing about the day, and I get about a full page down. The forklift, the rescheduling, the manual offload, being there until 10, the drive home, what I walked into at the door. Then I stop and read what I've written. It's not a privilege entry. It's just what the day was. I stare at it. I cross the whole thing out, every line, pressing hard enough that it's unreadable. Then, underneath, I write something about how at least my manager trusts me to handle crises without hovering. I close the notebook and go to sleep. I don't feel great about crossing it out, but I do it anyway. The 3rd week is when the entries start drifting somewhere different. Priya has a friend over, one of her classmates from the sociology program. They're in the living room having a conversation about toxic masculinity and how it shows up in everyday interactions, in language, in the way men move through shared spaces. I come in from the kitchen to say hello. The classmate smiles at me for about 3 or 4 seconds, and then they both continue talking like I've already left the room. I'm still standing in the doorway. They're not being cruel about it. They're just absorbed. I go back to the kitchen. I figure I'll make tea because it's something to do, and it's the hospitable thing. I boil the water, find the mugs, bring 2 cups out and set them on the coffee table in front of them. They're still going, talking about something a professor said. Neither of them looks up. I go back to the bedroom and sit on the edge of the bed. I'm not steaming about it. I just register it. Later that night, I open the notebook. I write, "Made tea for both of them. Brought it out to the living room. Neither of them acknowledged it. Went back to the bedroom." I read it after I write it. I don't cross it out this time. I don't try to reframe it as a privilege or spin it into something that fits the original assignment. I close the notebook and put it on the nightstand. It's the first entry that isn't trying to be what she asked for. At the time, I don't think too much about it. Looking back, that was probably the real start of something. A few days later, Priya has something new to add to the arrangement. She's been thinking about it, and she wants me to not just write about privilege, but actually practice giving one up for a week. I ask what that means in practical terms. She says she's noticed I always sit at the head of the kitchen table. She calls it a dominant spatial behavior I'm probably not even aware of. She also says I tend to be the one who initiates conversations rather than waiting, which reinforces something she calls the masculine default. So the ask is that for 7 days I avoid the head of the table and let her speak first in conversations. I sit with that for a moment. I think about the fact that this table was in the apartment before she moved in. I think about the fact that I sit at that end because it's closer to the kitchen, and I'm the one who usually gets up to grab things during meals. I think about mentioning both of these things. I decide against it. I say, okay. She seems genuinely pleased, like something real just happened. That night, I write 4 pages in the notebook. Most I've written in one sitting since I started. I'm not emotional when I write it, not angry. I just lay out what's been happening, starting from when we first moved in together. How things started, how they shifted, what the day-to-day texture of this is now. I've never done that before, Just put it all in sequence and looked at it. When I close the notebook, I feel something I'd call clarity. I don't know what to do with it yet, but it's there. Around the 5th or 6th week, the entries become more regular, without me really deciding that. Not because dramatic things are happening every day, just because I've developed the habit of noticing and writing things down. And what I keep noticing has nothing to do with privilege. There's one evening I remember clearly from around this stretch. Priya is on the phone with her mother for a long time, close to an hour. I'm in the living room watching TV. I can hear pieces of the conversation through the wall, not everything, just fragments when her voice carries. At one point, I catch her describing our living situation to her mom. She says something about staying with someone who hasn't woken up yet. Just like that, matter of fact, like she's describing the weather. I'm sitting maybe 15 feet from that wall. I keep watching TV. I don't move. I don't say anything. When she comes out after the call, we watch a show together and go to bed. I don't bring up what I heard. I write it down later, the date, what I caught, where I was sitting when I caught it. No commentary, just what happened. Another one from around that time. I'd had a long shift, and I cooked when I got home because I was hungry and nothing was ready. I made enough for both of us and left hers covered on the stove. Afterward, I asked if she could handle the dishes because I had an early morning and I was running on fumes. She said asking her to do the dishes was me trying to impose traditional gender roles onto her. I pointed out calmly that she hadn't cooked in about 3 weeks. She said cooking was a choice I was making for myself, and she shouldn't be expected to participate in domestic labor on my schedule. I stood there thinking about that for a second. Then I did the dishes myself because going to sleep with the kitchen in that state bothers me more than the extra 10 minutes. I wrote it the next morning. Date, what happened, what was said, what I ended up doing. Just the sequence, no editorializing. There's another one from around this period that I think about sometimes. I mentioned something that happened at work during dinner, just making conversation. She interrupted me about 4 words in to ask if I'd noticed that I always center my own experiences in conversation. I said I was just telling her about my day. She said that was exactly her point, that it's always my day, my workplace, my problems. I asked what she'd like to talk about instead. She said she'd appreciate it if I asked about her experiences more proactively. I asked about her day. She talked for the next 40 minutes. I listened. I wrote down just the opening exchange that night, not the whole 40 minutes, just the part where I got corrected for talking about my day at dinner. I start writing entries differently around this point. Instead of describing how I feel about things, I just write what happens. Date, event, outcome. Like a log, more than a journal in the personal sense. I'm not sure exactly when I made that switch. It happened gradually. Priya asks occasionally whether I'm keeping up with it, and I say yes, and I show her an entry from the week. I pick the bland ones for this, something about the commute, or a moment at a store, or whatever. She reads it and says I'm making real progress. I say thanks. I mean neither word, but I say it. There's a weekend somewhere in this stretch that I think about sometimes. I had 2 days off, back to back, which doesn't happen often with my schedule. I was actually looking forward to it. Just the idea of sleeping in and having no particular place to be. The first morning, I wake up late and make a big breakfast, and I'm feeling genuinely decent. Priya is up, and she says she has a study group meeting that afternoon, and she needs the apartment quiet in the morning to prepare. I say sure, and I take my coffee to the bedroom. I spend most of the morning in there reading on my phone. Not how I imagined spending it, but not a big deal. The study group ends up running long, and she gets home around 8 that night. She's tired and doesn't want to talk much. We watch something together and go to sleep. The second day of the weekend, she wants to go to a market with her friend, and she asks if I want to come. I say sure. We spend a couple of hours walking around. Her friend is there, the same one from the tea incident a few weeks earlier. The two of them walk together and talk the whole time. I walk a few feet behind mostly. When they pick things up to look at them, I hold whatever we're already carrying. When Priya wants something, I take it from her so she can keep both hands free to look at the next stall. Nobody comments on any of this. I write about it later, not with any bitterness, just noting that this was my 2 days off and what they actually looked like. There's also a conversation from around this time that I wrote 3 different versions of before I settled on, just stating what happened. I had been putting in extra hours because we were short-staffed after 2 people quit in the same week. No extra pay for it, just covering because that's part of the job when the team is thin. I mentioned it at dinner, not complaining, just giving context for why I was tired that week. Priya said something about whether I'd thought about whether I was letting my job define my identity. She said a lot of men struggle with finding worth outside of their professional role. I sat with that for a second. I was tired from covering extra shifts so we could continue paying for the apartment we were sitting in. I nodded and said, maybe she had a point. Wrote it down that night. The 3rd draft was just 2 sentences stating what happened. I kept deleting the rest. Around the 2-month mark, my coworker says something I think about for a long time afterward. This is the guy who's been at the company longer than anyone else, been through a divorce, not a big talker, but not someone who misses things. He notices something is off one afternoon during inventory. He doesn't make a whole thing out of it, just pulls me aside and asks straight whether things are okay at home. I think about how to answer. I tell him I've been keeping a journal. He asks what kind. I tell him a privileged journal, my girlfriend's idea. I write about moments where being a man benefited me. He's quiet for a second or two. Then he says, "Whose privilege?" 2 words. That's the whole question. I don't answer. We go back to counting. But I think about that question for the rest of the shift and most of the drive home. I write about the conversation that night, the question and the silence after it. The apartment stays calm on the surface throughout this stretch. No blowout fights, nothing dramatic. It's more like a steady low-grade pressure that's become the normal temperature of things. She has a vocabulary for everything I do, and the vocabulary always frames it as something I need to address. When I push back on something, she says I'm being defensive. When I go quiet instead of engaging, she says I'm stonewalling. When I ask a direct question about something, she says I'm being reductive. Every move has a word, and the word always lands the same way. At some point I notice I'm automatically editing what I'm going to say before I say it. Not consciously, just reflexively. I run a mental check on whatever I'm about to bring up against a list of topics that spiral, and I reroute around them. It saves time, but it's a strange thing to be doing in your own kitchen. I write about that when I notice it, just the fact that it's happening, and roughly when it started. The notebook is getting full at this point. I flip back through from the beginning one night and read some of the early entries. They're stiff in a way that's a little embarrassing now. Short, careful, trying hard to find the right kind of material for the assignment. Then they change. The tone changes, the subjects change, the whole purpose of writing in it changes. By the time I reach the current entries, it's not the same exercise Priya handed me the notebook for. It's a record of 14 months. Not a curated record, just an honest one. Every significant moment is in there, dated, documented. I close it and put it back on the nightstand without saying anything about it to her. Things stay this way for several more weeks. Nothing major happens on the surface. We go about our routines. I go to work, she goes to class. We share the apartment in the way that we do. She gives me a long explanation one evening about something called emotional labor distribution and how it's typically unequal in heterosexual relationships. I listen to the whole thing. I don't point out that the labor of paying for most of the household has been pretty unevenly distributed for over a year. I write that down later, not the whole explanation, just the irony of the topic. There is something that happens around this time that I only wrote one line about, but I remember clearly. I come home, and there are dishes in the sink from what looks like lunch. I make dinner. I clean up after dinner. I also clean up the lunch dishes from earlier. Priya is working on something at the table the whole time I'm doing this. She doesn't offer to help. She doesn't say anything about the dishes. I don't say anything either. I just do it. One line in the notebook. Cleaned the lunch dishes that weren't mine again. Didn't say anything. Another thing from around this stretch. Her mother calls while I'm home one afternoon and Priya hands me the phone. I've met her mother a couple of times. We're on decent terms. We talk for a few minutes. Her mother asks how I'm doing, whether work is good, normal things. I say work is fine, things are going well. After I hang up and hand the phone back, Priya says she's glad I'm working on being more communicative. I say, okay. I don't know exactly what she means by that, but I've learned not to ask for clarification on comments like that. I write it down. There's a whole week in here where the entries are short, because I'm genuinely busy with a big shipment coming in at work. I'm there early. I'm there late. By the time I get home, I'm too tired to write much. Priya mentions toward the end of the week that she feels like I've been emotionally unavailable. I tell her it's been a heavy work week. She says she understands, but that it's part of a pattern she's noticed. I say okay and open the notebook and write one sentence. Then I close it and go to sleep. One more thing from this period before I get to the part that changed everything. We're watching TV one night, something we both wanted to see, and I laugh at something. She looks at me and says she didn't know I found that funny. I say yeah, it was funny. She says it's interesting. She's been thinking about how humor functions as a coping mechanism, and whether some of the things I find funny say something about how I process discomfort. I look at the TV. I say, I don't laugh for the rest of the episode. I write about it that night, the laugh and what came after it. It's one of the stranger entries, because nothing actually happened. It was just a laugh at a TV show. But I wrote it down anyway because it felt like it belonged in the record. There's a period in here where I start paying attention to how much I apologize, not tracking it exactly, just noticing it. I say sorry a lot. Sorry I'm tired. Sorry dinner is late. Sorry I didn't respond fast enough to a text. Sorry the answer I gave wasn't what she was looking for. I notice that she doesn't apologize much. Not in a resentful way. It's just a thing I start observing. I don't write a big dramatic entry about it. Just one line. Counted 4 apologies today, received 0. I read it the next morning and almost crossed it out. I didn't. There's also a conversation about money somewhere around this time. We're talking about the apartment, whether to renew the lease when it comes up. I mentioned that it would help if she could contribute something toward rent. Not the full half, just something, even a portion. She says she can't right now because she's in school and school is her contribution to her future. I ask what contribution she makes to the apartment we're currently living in. She says she handles a lot of the emotional maintenance of the relationship, which I don't seem to recognize as labor. I think about that. I think about the dishes and the tea and the apologies. I don't say any of that. I say okay and drop the lease conversation entirely. I write about it that night, the full exchange. It's one of the longer entries. There is a specific conversation from this stretch that I remember. I'd come home and she was reading something, and she said she wanted to talk when I had a minute. I made dinner. We ate. I asked what was on her mind. She wanted to revisit the spatial behavior arrangement from earlier. She'd been thinking and felt that the 7-day experiment wasn't long enough to create a real habit change. She wanted me to commit to the adjusted seating on an ongoing basis. I was sitting in my usual spot at that moment. I said okay and moved to the other chair. She said thank you. I wrote about it later, just noted the date and what was asked and what I did. No analysis, just the record. There's one more incident before the professor thing that I want to include because it belongs in the picture. I had a bad day at work. Nothing dramatic, just the kind where everything takes twice as long as it should and nothing cooperates. I came home quiet, not sulking, just tired and not talkative. Priya asked what was wrong. I said nothing specific, just a rough day. She said she could tell I was being withdrawn, and she'd appreciate it if I communicated more openly about my emotional state rather than shutting down. I said I wasn't shutting down. I was just tired. She said that was exactly what shutting down looks like from the outside. I looked at her. I said, okay. I went to the bedroom. I opened the notebook and wrote one entry. Came home tired from a rough day, was asked to communicate more openly rather than shut down, said okay, went to the bedroom. I closed the notebook. That's the entry. That's the whole thing. But I wrote it because it's part of the pattern. Anytime I wasn't fully present and engaging, it became a named behavior with a label. Shutting down, stonewalling, being withdrawn, being emotionally unavailable, just words for being tired that I wasn't allowed to be. Then comes the professor conversation. Priya mentions it one evening while I'm doing something else, casually, like a logistical update. She's been working with a professor from her program on a project related to how men respond to structured self-reflection exercises. The Privilege Journal, she says, was part of this project. I stop what I'm doing. I ask what she means by part of it. She explains that several people in her social circle have been keeping similar journals, and the professor wants to come to our apartment to review them and have a group discussion. There's a pause. I ask when she was planning to tell me I was apparently part of a research project. She says she's telling me now. I ask whether she asked me before she included me. She says it's not a formal study. It's just a discussion. It's casual. I ask whether my notebook is going to be read by her professor. She says it would really help her work. I'm watching her the whole time. She's completely calm. Not guilty, not evasive, just calm. Like she genuinely doesn't see why this particular sequence of events would require a conversation beforehand. I say, okay. She seems relieved, like she'd been a little anxious to bring it up, and this went better than expected. Says the professor is planning to come sometime the following week. After she goes to her room, I sit at the kitchen table in the quiet. I don't open the notebook. I don't turn the TV on. I sit there with the kitchen light on, thinking about the fact that my private journal about my private life is apparently data in someone's research project, and that the conversation I just had is being treated as sufficient for that. I sit there for a while. Then I go to bed without writing anything. First night I've skipped in a few weeks. She leaves early the next morning for class. I'm off that day, adjusting my hours for later in the week. I make coffee. I bring the notebook to the kitchen table. I sit there for a minute before I open it. Then I open it to page 1. I read it from the beginning, every page, every entry, in order. The early ones where I was writing about my commute and workplace dynamics and trying hard to find the right kind of content. The crossed-out page from the forklift night, you can still read pieces of it under the black lines, the tea entry, the dishes entry, the phone call to her mother that I overheard from 15 feet away, the entries about editing myself before I speak, the one about my coworker and those 2 words, the weekend where I carried bags at the market and walked a few feet behind, the entry about being told my day at work was defining my identity, the entries about the table seating, the money conversation about the lease, the one about coming home tired and being told I was shutting down. All of it, start to finish, in order, with the dates. It takes close to an hour. When I finish, I close the notebook and I just sit there. I'm not particularly emotional about it. I'm just looking at the table, thinking about the fact that what I just read is the actual account. Not the version I was trying to produce when she handed me the notebook. The real one. The one that wrote itself while I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. I think about the question my coworker asked. Whose privilege? I think I know the answer now. After a while, I turn to the last blank page. I pick up a pen. I sit there for a second before I start. Then I just start. I write that I've read this from the beginning and that the whole relationship is in it. Not the version where I was doing the exercise correctly. The actual version. I write that for 14 months I covered rent, groceries, utilities, and her phone bill while being told I needed to examine my advantages more carefully. I write about the forklift night, coming home exhausted after being there until 10, walking in the door and getting a conversation about my communication patterns. I write about the tea nobody looked up to acknowledge. I write about the dishes and the explanation I received when I asked for help with them. I write about sitting somewhere different at my own table for a week as a symbolic gesture and then being asked to commit to it permanently. I write about hearing her tell her mother I hadn't woken up yet while I was sitting 15 feet from that wall. I write about 14 months of running a mental check on what I'm about to say before I say it, automatically, because I've mapped which topics spiral and I route around them now. I write about the apologies I counted one afternoon, 4 outgoing, 0 incoming. I write about the money conversation, the rent, and what she said about emotional labor being her contribution. I write about coming home tired and being told I was shutting down. I write that being enrolled in someone's research project without being asked was the last piece of information I needed. Not because it's the worst thing that happened, but because it tells me clearly how I'm seen here. Not as a partner, as material. I write that I'm not angry writing this, and I mean it. I write that I've read the full record, and I understand that in this dynamic there is no version where I'm not the problem to be corrected. No amount of changed seats or different entry points into conversations is going to change that, because the framework doesn't allow for it. I write that I'm leaving. I put the pen down. I close the notebook. I set it in the center of the kitchen table where it'll be the first thing she sees. I go to the bedroom and I pack a bag. Clothes, chargers, my laptop, things from the bathroom, my work boots. I make 2 trips to the car. There's a photo on the dresser from the first year, before things were the way they became. I look at it for a second and leave it there. I text my coworker from the hallway and ask if I can stay at his place for a few nights. He sends back just his address, no questions. I take my keys off the hook by the door. The notebook is on the kitchen table in the center where I put it. I take one more look at it from the doorway. I leave before noon. Priya gets home that afternoon. I know because calls start coming in a few hours later. 2 of them back to back. I don't pick up either. Then a text saying she found the notebook on the table and read it and asking me to call her. I read it and put the phone face down on the coffee table at my coworker's place. His TV is on, some kind of game. He doesn't ask me anything. I watch the game and don't touch my phone for the rest of the night. The next day, there's a longer message. She's upset, which I expected. What surprises me a little is the specific thing she's upset about. She says I was supposed to use the notebook for the exercise, not to keep a record of her behavior. She says it was a tool for growth, and I weaponized it. She says it feels like a betrayal. I sit with the word betrayal for a minute. I think about being enrolled in a research project without being asked. I think about 14 months of rent. I think about the tea. I think about that crossed out page where I stayed up fixing a broken forklift and came home to a fight. I think about a lot of things. I put the phone down without responding. There's a second message the same day, a few hours after the first. This one is more analytical, less emotional. She says she thinks I've been building resentment instead of communicating, and that the notebook was a passive-aggressive response to problems I should have addressed directly. She says she's willing to work on it if I come back. I read that twice. I put the phone down again. A few more days go by. One more message arrives, and this one is quieter than the others. She says she went back and read the whole journal from the beginning, all of it, including the early entries where I crossed things out. She says she wants to talk about it. I think about that for most of a day. Then I text back. I say there's nothing left to talk about. Everything I had to say is already in the notebook, and she's already read it. She sees the message. She doesn't respond after that. I stayed at my coworker's place for about a week. He didn't ask questions, just made sure there was food in the fridge and the remote was accessible. We watched games, we ate, we went to work in the mornings. He said one thing the whole time I was there. On like the fourth night, he just said, "You'll be all right." That was it. Then I found a room to rent about 10 minutes from work. Nothing fancy, a room with a window and a closet and a shared kitchen with 2 other people who work odd hours and mostly keep to themselves. First night there, I slept 9 hours straight without waking up once. I don't know exactly what to say about that, except that I hadn't slept like that in a long time, and I hadn't fully realized it until I did. I've been in the room a few weeks now. Things are quiet in a way I'd genuinely forgotten things could be. I come home from work, I make food, I watch something, I go to sleep. Nobody's explaining my behavioral patterns to me. Nobody's building a case about a pattern they've noticed. Nobody's asking me to sit somewhere different. When I come home tired, I just come home tired. I don't have to manage it against someone else's framework. I go to bed without running a filter over what I said during the day. I didn't realize how much mental energy was going toward that until it stopped going toward it. It's like finding out there was background noise the whole time and you only notice it when it's gone. Work is the same as it always was. My coworker asked me a couple of weeks in whether I was doing all right. I said yeah, genuinely. He nodded. That was the whole conversation. The guys at work don't know details. They don't need to. I just show up and do the job. That part of my life hasn't changed. I've thought about what I'd do differently if I had to do it again. Probably nothing dramatic. I'd have had the real conversation earlier instead of nodding and picking up a notebook. But I'm not sure it would have changed much. The dynamic was what it was before the notebook existed. The notebook just made it legible. Gave me a way to look at it all at once, instead of experiencing each thing individually and letting it pass. Priya left the notebook with the building manager in a sealed envelope with my name written on it. No note inside, just the notebook. I've thought about what that was supposed to communicate. I genuinely don't know. Maybe she wanted me to have it back because it had my writing in it. Maybe she read the whole thing one more time and wanted it out of the apartment. Maybe it was something else. Either way, it's in the nightstand drawer here in my room. I haven't decided what to do with it. For now, it's just there, same as it was on the table when she gave it to me. Looking back, when she first put it on the kitchen table, I thought it was just a weird thing I'd do for a few weeks to keep the peace. Write a few sentences each night, show I was making an effort, move on. I wasn't expecting to fill the whole thing. I wasn't expecting it to become what it became. I wasn't expecting to sit down one quiet morning and read it cover to cover and understand something I'd been sidestepping for over a year. I just picked up a cheap green notebook because it was easier than the conversation I didn't have energy for. That's the honest version. She wanted documentation of my advantages. She designed the whole exercise around that idea. She handed me the notebook, explained the rules, checked in on it. She gave me the pen. I documented my advantages, just not the ones she was looking for.